Well, welcome to the Edge, and this afternoon, a beautiful sunny afternoon with an ambient thing going on. The weather's decent. I'm fortunate to have Johannes Werner. Johannes is a writer, a publisher, and a number of other things. But rather than me try to explain all that you do, Johannes, you talk about yourself a little bit here.
Well, what's relevant for today is I enjoyed the grace of late birth in Germany, 1963. It's after World War II. I grew up in a thriving West Germany. Things were moving upwards.
What city?
Freiburg in South Germany.
The Black Forest, or Schwarzwald.
Black Forest. It's a university town, 200,000 people, beautifully located.
How many in the university?
Some 50,000 students.
It's like, in that sense, it's like cities here that have a large university and a relatively smaller overall population.
That's
Fourth
right.
of the population are students, basically.
Lots of professors, lots of students, very vivacious atmosphere, lots
Beautiful
of discussion, lots of protests.
Now, you had to know about the end of the war, since you were born in '63, which was 19 years prior to your birth, and you didn't learn about this until maybe you were 4, 5, 6, or 7. Your father experienced all that. That's who had to provided you your background.
I was lucky enough that I learned about this through my parents first. Many Germans growing up in post-war Germany did not, because their parents did not want to touch on the issue for a variety of reasons, not the least being trauma and simply not wanting to remember what they'd lived through. My parents were very willing to talk because they were very young. They were respectively 16 and 18 when the war ended. Both were involved marginally. Both, particularly Mom, felt betrayed because she was very surprised.
Felt betrayed. What's that about?
She was involved in all kinds of youth activities relating to the party
During the war.
Fascists during war. She had skeptical parents, but very little of that skepticism came across because her parents did not dare talk to their children openly against the regime, because it could come back to haunt them.
Like how?
Children blabbing at school about
But that way, but what would happen if that?
if somebody got wind of dissenting opinions, there would be a citation. There would be an interview at the police station. It would start first on the party level with the Blockwart. Somebody would knock at your door.
What's that? What's a Blockwart?
They were the guardians and the vigilantes of the party on the neighborhood level.
So there were a local police force outside of the
Not a
constabulary?
police force, it was neighbors who were
Just neighbors.
spying on you.
So community or watchdogs.
Community watchdogs. So Mom grew up with all this youth activity. There was sports, there was lots of kids doing their thing,
Now this-
outside of the parents' home.
She was how old when the war ended?
She was 18.
So that means this all happened leading up to the war, as far as she's concerned. The war started in 41 as far as the United States is concerned, but before then 38. So that would have been 38 when they went into Poland, wasn't it?
39.
39. So later, yeah. So in the last 5, 6 years of the war, the overall war, the assault on Poland and everything else, the Germans were aware of all that. And the power of the that's a slip, the German army, which is, they compared themselves to the Romans in many respects.
Okay.
You heard that at times.
Didn't last that long.
It didn't last so long. In Their Lying Eyes was the title of the show. What does that mean in terms of Germany and what was happening at that time?
Well, and what it meant from mom, for example, one of those curious things I got to find out later in my life is that much of the vocabulary I learned from mom was actually Yiddish.
Jewish.
Yiddish is the Eastern European language many
Usually
Jews spoke.
associated with Jews.
It just so happened she did not know that this was Yiddish, but she was using a lot of Yiddish vocabulary, and so I asked her, where did you pick that up? Oh, this is what we spoke at school. How come? Well, there were lots of Jewish kids, and what happened to them? Well, they disappeared. They were not there anymore eventually.
Maybe they went to a border somewhere and it's stuck in a cage.
Mom could not say what happened to them because she did not know.
She didn't know.
But what she saw is the kids were not there anymore. Now, this was in 1933. Mom was barely elementary school age, so these are
The kids she grew up
very
with in school disappeared.
they disappeared. Yes. And that she remembers. They were not there anymore. But she does not have she did not have a context back then.
One of the things we didn't say, we got ahead of ourselves a little bit. I wanted you to talk about what you do as a professional person right now. We're going to go back a little bit in the conversation to remind people that what you do relative to the Caribbean, Cuba, and so forth.
Well, I define myself as a journalist. In other words, I'm trying to look at the facts and assemble them to an as full picture as possible. And I do this in a low information environment country called Cuba, where the information flow is not very good, at least on the media level. On the journalism level, the type of information you get officially is very controlled. I'm putting together bits and pieces, try to assemble the full picture of Cuba, and I am focusing just on economic issues and business issues. I'm trying to stay away from political topics.
Hard to do, right?
Hard to do, yes.
There's always that temptation.
Of course.
A little crack in the door that you want to get inside of.
Yes.
Because you see the human element from your background, from your mother, probably more than anyone. Coming back to your mother and her experience with missing children. Do you see or know of anything like that in Cuba?
In Cuba? Well, there's the trauma of the revolution and a tenth of the population leaving the country or being expelled from the country after the revolution.
So they had children who disappeared in a healthy way by leaving the country,
Well, everybody knows where they are.
if that's the case.
Yes.
Let's come back to Germany and your lying eyes and that idea. That idea goes to the point of your mother's curiosity had to be, what happened to so-and-so? What happened to this? What happened to that? And she had to ask those questions of herself and privately, carefully of others, her mother and so forth.
My best guess is her parents were very protective. They did not want to talk about these things, and they kind of led a privileged life a little bit on the margins of the small town where she was. Her dad ran a research institute with a big park around it, and they were 6 siblings growing up, essentially playing with each other. There were only occasional visitors from town. So my hunch is her parents tried to keep their children protected away from all the other stuff going on in town.
I think we talked about when your mother realized, so you really have to talk about the father and your mother and their experiences. She had to wonder and miss those kids that she knew, had to have missed them,
Right.
and longed to know of what happened to them. When did she have any idea that she had some idea that she knew?
She says it did not happen until post 1945.
Really?
Until after the war was over. It was in the family. There was a brother of my grandfather, great uncle, who married a Jewish woman from France.
Oh,
And they saw early on what was happening. They saw the signs on the wall and fled Germany. They ended up in France first. And, luckily for them, they apparently got out of France before the Germans invaded and ended up in Venezuela. So there was this uncle who was outside of Germany. They knew he was married to a Jewish woman. There was I'm just trying to get the family relation straight here. She was a great aunt from Berlin who was lesbian. She lived with another woman. They had a child. It was quite amazing.
they adopted somebody's child.
And they left. They ended up in the United States.
So they got a man to get one of them pregnant.
In the 1930s.
Wow, what a... Of course, the late 20s were the roaring 20s, so sex was really a freedom to a degree in those days, and into Germany as well.
The kids did not know about them
Right.
being lesbian, of course. It
No,
was
but-
just the two aunts, and there was a child, you know.
Sure.
Well, this is what it was. But in hindsight, this is how I describe it, you know. So there was family who
So
was.
what did they say when they, after the war, when they realized what they were really looking at? Comments. They started to come together in family conversations of what they witnessed and what they didn't realize they were witnessing.
Well, on mom's side, it was hard because the uncle who had left came back in 1945 to visit.
Mm-hmm.
And he had children who were born and grew up in Venezuela. And there was a lot of discord. And the way mom described it is they always reproached our staying in Germany.
Oh,
And therefore suggested that we were complicit
because you chose not to leave.
because you chose not to leave. You were complicit, and those who were in Germany, of course, resented that, and so there was a very cool relationship between those two branches of the family.
The judgment was so strong against them, they felt that was unfair.
And there was another issue that haunted mom's family, and that is grandpa was an indirect beneficiary of a purging.
Really?
Yes.
What
He got
purging?
his post.
What
in-
purging would you talk?
He was an apiologist, you know. That sounds like
Of what?
bees. He was an expert of bees.
Well, that's a big deal.
Well,
People don't
but
realize
it sounds like, you know, bees, honey, you know, it's
that.
nothing.
Bees are crucial to all livestock and all growth.
Which is why he did not have to go to war.
Right. It's
He-
absolutely critical.
Yes, exactly. And he got his research post because one of the most famous apiologists in the world back then was a German Jesuit who taught at Humboldt University.
A Jesuit priest.
He was first a Jesuit priest and then did his dissertation on bees, and that was a groundbreaking
people-
work, and he just happened to stick to his Jewish colleagues and students in 1933.
Wow.
So he was cut off.
Got off.
And because he was cut off, all these posts got freed suddenly. You know, there was a whole movement from below with young academics moving up. And grandpa was one of them.